Good Saturday afternoon, everyone. You have tuned into Humanity in the Headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me today, as always, is my co-host, Mr. David Seaton. We're on IntellectualRadio.com. Momentarily, we will be streaming Facebook Live, and you'll also be able to watch this on YouTube. But we thank you today for joining us right now. We have a lot to talk about. We are very excited to be here. I'm glad to be here after a week of being off. I thank Mr. Seaton for holding it down in my absence. There was an amazing show last week where he covered fathers' rights. And we also had, was it a conversation about Russia, Dave? Definitely. So he really deconstructed the whole Russia situation, helping our listeners more easily understand the complexities of that. And he just did an amazing job. So the tandem is back this week. The 1-2 punch, and we have a lot to talk about. So, Dave, it's been a crazy week, right?
It's going to continue to be a crazy week as long as Donald Trump is in the White House. Let me just say that.
The thing about that is, it's like a love-hate thing. Like, I hate a lot of the things that he endorses, a lot of things that he does, but at the same time, from a media perspective, there's always so much meat on the bone, so many things to talk about. So we are very excited again this week. Let me just give you a little preview. Later in the show today, we'll be talking to Miss Gloria Brown Marshall, who is a constitutional law professor. You cannot get any sharper than that. We're going to talk about the nomination and the successful nomination of Judge Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. When we come back after break, however, we are going to talk about clearly the bombings in Syria and the Trump handling of it and the response by the Trump administration. And where do we go from here? We have an excellent guest for you. Sit tight. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to discuss the bombings in Syria. Again, you're watching Humanity in the Headlines. Thanks so much. we are back. Thank you so much for sticking with us. And as I said earlier, we have a lot to talk about, Dave. I'm so excited to talk about this, to bring our listeners in, to share this information, get people on the same page, and just get people the information they need to develop their own point of view and their own opinion. But we want to give you as much factual, credible information. With that said, what we like to do here at Humanity in the Headlines is bring on the most factual, credible guest. And in that vein, we have with us today Mr. Saeed Arakat. He is the Washington Bureau Chief at, how do you pronounce that? Al-Quds? Al-Quds Daily Newspaper. Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Al-Quds, and it is the only continuously Palestinian newspaper, before and after the occupation. So it's been around for a very long time.
Excellent. And also, you were formerly a spokesman, director of public information for the United Nations. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was in Iraq for 5 years.
Excellent. Yeah, back from what was that, July of 2005 to May of 2010. So you are certainly someone that we can consider qualified to talk about this situation in Syria and then the Trump response. That'd be correct, right? I think you're one of the good people we could talk to about this.
Yeah, sounds great.
Absolutely. So let's do this. We'll kind of get to the politics of it later. I'd like to kind of get into the meat and substance of the situation first. Like Donald Trump, and I'm going to take him at his word. I was extremely moved by the pictures and the video that I had seen of the not just the children, but all the people that were impacted by the gas bombing of Syria by Assad. Saw people being hosed off, watered down, clothes having to be stripped off, and people clearly in severe pain. And with that said, part of me kind of appreciated some type of action being taken against Assad. But at the same time, now that I've had a day or two for it to kind of settle in, it seems as if a lot of it may have been for theater. How is it that we can actually help the people in Syria and it not be theater? What is it that the United States could do to actually be of use to the people of Syria?
That's a very good question. Definitely, these pictures are quite moving, and they are horrifying. And I think they can, ignite passions even within someone who, at least we thought, was passionate, like the President of the United States. Excuse me. So I understand that it's a terrible, terrible situation, and I think anyone who did that ought to be brought before justice, and punished, publicly. Now, the problem with this issue is that we don't know. We don't know what happened. There's been no investigation. The time that lapsed between the strike that was conducted without any congressional approval, international approval, and the gas attack is very short. I mean, the UN did not even have time to discuss what kind of mechanism, how they should investigate, and all these things. Investigating this issue requires a great deal of knowledge and expertise, but above all, to be there on the ground. So none of this happened, and the source was not independently verified by the U.S. That is something that I ask about all the time. It was not verified independently, so it was conveyed to them by Syrian rebel groups that have taken the matter. So, we don't know. It seems to me, looking at all that has been reported, everything about it, it seems like in a lot of ways a conviction that was in search of evidence, so to speak. So we'll see. I think the truth will come out, as we have learned many years later about the attack near Ghouta in 2013, which almost drove the U.S. to go to war then. So this is a very, very complex issue. Now, you asked, how could we help Syria? And remember, it's probably the only viable country in the third world. In 2011, it was debt-free. It was manufacturing its own medicine, its own food, its own clothing, its own industry. It was really self-sustaining. It owed not a penny to the world. It was a model. Education was free. Medical care is free. People came and went as they pleased. Many American students went and studied there and so on. So, I mean, I remember traveling in and out of Syria for so many years. It was a great place. It was secular, but then suddenly this whole thing changed, and the United States, in one way or another, found itself really on the side of extremist groups, and that's the sad thing. I don't think the U.S. can really help if it keeps pouring money and material and weapons as they have to the rebel group. If they really want to help Syria, what they need to do is put their weight behind a political solution for real and not just in rhetoric, and bring the parties together, see who's who. I mean, I can tell you this, the U.S. does not know who the rebel groups are because there are so many of them. There's almost 800-900 of them. And, Stefan de Mistura, who is the envoy to Syria, is a close friend of mine and someone that I work with. I was his spokesman in Iraq. I see him and so on. And it really is, it is very complex. So the U.S., first of all, needs to say, when they say, who are the moderate rebels? We need to define them. You need to give tons of money or medicine, that's fine, but make sure that it goes to the right people, it goes to the same people and not to sustain these extremist rebel groups. So there is a great deal that can be done, but above all, they need to work within the international community because you can't just be lawless. I mean, we all remember how in the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003, they kept repeating the same statement as we hear today. He gathers his own people. I mean, we all remember that amazing footage of the then Secretary of State Colin Powell, standing at the Security Council showing the vial, of allegedly chemical and biological weapons that Iraq possessed at the time, and then it turned out to be false, right? So we need to work within the community with honesty and decency. We need to be driven not by the need to project power or the need to satisfy some really cranky members of the military-industrial complex or the GOP like John McCain and others, and look at the past and see if we can really work together. This Syria will not be resolved by military action. Seriously.
That's all great. That's all great information. But you mentioned a couple of times. You mentioned a political solution. You mentioned it being very problematic trying to identify the rebel groups because there are so many of them. It sounds like at the root of this, before we can get any solution, it sounds like Bashar al-Assad needs to come out of Syria, right?
Well, I mean, listen. I mean, we keep saying that we want the Syrian people to decide, right? We need to have the Syrian people decide the fate of their country. Let's have the Syrian people decide the fate of their country. You can't say, because remember, we did regime change, right? We did that in Iraq, we did that in Libya, and look at the mess we have. So you can't say, I'm going to introduce, I'm going to bring the public to exercise the right to democracy and freedom and so on all these things by destroying the institutions that have been, around for 70, 80 years. I can assure you, I was in Iraq for 5 years and the country was destroyed, and it will continue to have this mess for a long time to come. And who destroyed it? It was the American invasion. So we don't want the same thing. If you want to say Bashar al-Assad needs to go, or stay, whatever it is, we need to make sure, one, that these institutions stay in place. Two, to guard against, the rebel groups, basically these extremists, al-Nusra, ISIS, all these people carving up Syria and sort of proclaim their own emirates in little tiny bits of hamlets and so on. And with all due respect, I mean, I know Syria quite well. I know it geographically, socially, politically. I lived there and so on. I got married there. I mean, it's not something that is abstract to me, as it may be to many people, many of your listeners. So, yes, I think there ought to be some sort of a transfer of power, but it has to be done legitimately. It has to be done through, bringing into a table people that represent the whole of Syria. Bashar al-Assad, believe it or not, I mean, I'm not a fan of Assad, but Bashar al-Assad does represent Christian minorities. Syria is made of minorities like Iraq and so on, and great many people. I mean, if you try to run the survey, the results will show you that. So that's what we need to commit to, and not really the slogan that he must go. Remember, now I was there when Hillary 2011 that he must go, his days are numbered. Those slogans do not bring solutions. They basically paint you into a corner. You have to have a policy. You have to have a strategy that is not based on military attacks like we've done since 2004, or like we did just a couple of days ago by striking cruise missiles and so on. So let's work with our allies. Let's work with regional powers. Everybody has, there's a proxy war going on in Syria. So you need to work very diligently to have some sort of a political outcome in Syria, for sure.
Well, that's an excellent answer. Let me ask you this then. This is Atiba, by the way. Given what you just said about working with international allies, do you think then that the strike or that the bombing by the Trump administration was done too quickly? And was that done without, did he break any type of international protocol by doing it so quickly without getting approval?
Oh, it's plain illegal. And first of all, there was no congressional approval for this. I mean, so it is already a violation of the Constitution of the United States of America. That's one. Second, under international law, it is really a war crime. If you look at the detailed analysis of what is a war crime, that's exactly it. Because it was not done, it was not discussed in the Security Council. It was the act itself. It did not work to bring about international consensus. There was no approval, no UN resolution, and all these things. It was basically a unilateral action. And then, it is really disturbing to see that all these people that otherwise would be incensed at violating the Constitution or international law, just rallying up behind a very bellicose act, an act that was really made to show the projection of power, because everybody talks about we should send a message. We should send a message to North Korea. We should send a message to Russia. I mean, that is not the way you conduct diplomacy. That is not the way you conduct yourself in the world. You're not some sort of a bully that you need to flex your muscle, because we all know that America is the most powerful country in the world, and it can destroy Syria in 5 minutes if they want to. So we know that. We don't need to project that. And America has to show itself as a leader, moral leader of the world in the literal sense. In other words, bring about peace, have some decent human rights standards and so on, and don't flout them. And not keep repeating the same mistakes that we have done time and time again, in Vietnam and Guatemala, in popular regimes like in Chile, conducting a military coup there, Guatemala. I mean, you can go on. The list is so long, in Afghanistan and Iraq and Africa. I mean, so it's time really for people to say, now, let's see what we can do. Let's see if we want to, because I think the terror problem is international. They have to understand if the terrorists, could control places like Hai-Sheikhun, where they are now, where allegedly the gas attack took place, or they can control Idlib, which is, the major city in that region, or any other part. Then, this becomes, give them the freedom to strike time and again, as we've seen yesterday, unfortunately, in Sweden. So you have to look at all the ramifications. We can't, conduct ourselves in the same kind of, bellicosity as we've done before.
Well, certainly. I mean, you mentioned right there, Mr. Erekat, about the object or the end goal being peace, but it's not really possible to negotiate peace with Bashar al-Assad. I mean, you can speak as a representative of a previous representative of the UN. What good would it have done for the world community, the United States, to go to the UN? You have to get a unanimous consent from the Security Council, and we weren't going to get a vote from Russia to go into Syria.
Well, I mean, look, I think that's not true, and I will tell you why. Look at the negotiating the Iran deal. The Iran deal, the United States, with the other 4 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, China, France, Britain, the United States, and Russia, plus Germany, were able to negotiate a very complex deal with Iran, by which Iran was, disarmed, or basically the Iranian nuclear plan was dismantled very successfully. So that is not true. We can get consensus, but to get consensus and to get that kind of thing, you have to give up on the notion that I want to do regime change. I don't, I can assure you that there are people totally mistrust, let's say, their former colonialists like France and England that really carved up that Arab world, that created problems for them, where the legacy of colonialism still goes on, as in Africa and so on. But they do trust the United States. The United States has to show a moral leadership and say, I want to do this. I want to do this. So we have examples many times. There are so many successes in the Security Council. And I know this. I used to work for the UN for a long time. There are so many successes in the fight against disease and the fight against Ebola and so on, where the U.S. could come together. So that is not true to say you're not going to get the kind of consensus. Of course, you're not going to get your type of resolution if it only seeks to empower, let's say, the so-called quote-unquote rebel groups or moderate rebel groups who are really not moderate. So if you do this, but if you really sit and say, let's see what is going on in Syria, all right? If you do this, I think that you will find that most of the Security Council members will follow suit. It has happened before, and it can happen again.
Well, you know what? We thank you for being on the show and bringing us your point of view. And definitely, I don't know if Russia would agree in the UN Security Council, but hopefully we'll get an opportunity to see that soon. Tell our listeners how they can find you and how they can follow you.
Well, they can follow me at SMErcat on Twitter. It's SMErcat. Or at or they can look at my Facebook and just like everybody else. I also teach at the American University, so they can look at my profile, all that good stuff.
All right, we thank you very much for being on Humanity in the Headlines, and we will be in touch, I'm sure, on a part 2 of this story. Have a great day.
Anytime.
Thank you, sir.
Any other story.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
So, Dave, great information by our guest, and certainly the resounding theme, the recurring theme that he seemed to stress over and over again was cooperation, from different communities,
right.
And hopefully we can get to that point. But I did want to make sure that that you and I had enough time to discuss the politics of this situation. And I had pulled up some information. I thought it was kind of striking, and I'm sure you've seen some of it during the week. But they talk about, I was able to pull up some of the tweets to show the evolution
right. About Donald Trump.
Yes. And his perspective in Syria. Before I get to this tweet, so let me just say this because I think it's necessary. To date, over 400,000 people have been killed in Syria. 55,000 of which have been children. Now, not all of the 470,000, nearing 500,000, were civilians, but all 55,000 children were. According to the Boston Globe, the attack on Tuesday killed more than 80 people, and over 350 were injured. But that pales in comparison to the attack that occurred under the Obama administration back in 2013. And I'm not saying that to diminish President Obama. What I'm saying is we're nearing 500 million deaths, 55,000 children. Why was this so significant?
Exactly. That's what baffles me, and it also baffles me. You said 80 people got killed in our retaliatory attack. So
no, that's 80 Syrians were killed in the initial attack.
Okay, you're talking about the initial attack.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure. Well, again, I haven't seen any numbers, any specific numbers on how many people, military or civilian, got killed when we dropped those bombs back on them.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, it doesn't. It's never made sense to me to say, "Hey, I see somebody killing their civilians, so I'm going to drop some bombs on them to kill some more civilians." Right. To punish them for killing their own civilians.
Right.
That has never made sense to me.
Well, I mean, we had a strategic strike on the Air Force base, and I get that.
I don't know how strategic it was. They were able to use it the very next morning.
Right. Right.
I don't know what their strategy was.
But so I'm sure that it doesn't appear there were any civilian casualties there. But my bigger point is, why do we care now?
Right.
Why didn't we care back in 2013 when 1,500 people were killed using chemical weapons. I think it was 1,300 were people killed using chemical weapons, as opposed to the 80 that were killed this time. There were women and children killed in that strike too. So much so that President Obama went to Congress and was yet again denied the authority to use force. So why do we care this time?
My point, you want to know what I really believe? This is just a distraction.
Always.
Trump needed a distraction. That Russia story was getting too hot.
Exactly.
And heavy, and that's what this was about. It was all about theater.
You're talking about a candidate who was down to 35%. Right. A Republican candidate who was down to 35%.
Right.
And I think you called it. I think you predicted it, that if his numbers got too low, there was going to be some type of strike.
I said a week ago on social media, I said it was either going to be North Korea or it was going to be Syria.
Exactly.
And everybody who responded was, no, he's not going to do that. And it was breaking news.
Right.
Breaking news day before last, wasn't it?
Well, here, let's go with the tweets. Let's talk about some of these tweets, because I got them. Let's see. August 30th, 2013. Trump says, if Obama attacks Syria and innocent civilians are killed and hurt, he and the U.S. will look very bad. He continues to say, and this is August 29th, this is the day before, what will we get for bombing Syria besides more debt and a possible long-term conflict? Obama needs congressional approval. And then he says one more. This one just blew my mind. The president must get congressional approval before attacking Syria. Big mistake if he does not. That's August 20th, 2013. So August 30th, 2013. So again, how did he go from admonishing President Obama for something he had not yet done to then doing the exact opposite, not seeking congressional approval and just going within 24 hours, striking Syria with his own legion of bombs?
Again, let me just say this for all of our listeners, the present day Republican Party in its entirety are hypocrites. There's not one, their ideology and their actions never match up. Trump ran on not being the world's policeman, and now he's starting to lose support from the people on the alt-right, and he's starting to lose support from some of the moderates. So we're going to see his numbers go down even more, I believe. I predict he'll be at 25% by the end of the summer, and then we'll be in a full-blown conflict in either the Middle East or North Korea.
Well, now that you mentioned the alt-right and where he's losing support, oh my goodness, I was able to pull some information on that too. So according to the Huffington Post, all of these people basically lost their minds. Ann Coulter at the top of the list. Conservative commentator Ann Coulter, who last month described President Donald Trump as Emperor God during an appearance on Fox News, expressed alarm on Friday about the president's decision to respond to a chemical attack in Syria by launching a missile strike against the country. She tweeted, "Those who wanted us meddling in the Middle East voted for other candidates." That was on April 7th of 2017. Then she also tweeted the same day, Trump campaigned on not getting involved in Middle East. Said it always helps our enemies and creates more refugees. Then he saw a picture on TV. So the far right, the Ann Coulters of the world, they are not happy at all. Breitbart, those folks are not happy with him at all.
No, not at all. And when he said he was going to put America first, what he meant to say was he's going to put American business first. Because I did also read that Raytheon, who is the manufacturer of the Tomahawk missile, their stock surprisingly went up the day after the attack.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine why.
Right. Absolutely. And here's the other thing when you talk about Republican hypocrisy. Just earlier this week, what Donald Trump had actually said, and I'm going to quote this, quote, "I'm not, and I don't want to be, the president of the world." Trump said this on Tuesday. "I'm the president of the United States, and from now on, it's going to be America first," end quote. Literally right after he said that, the gas attack happened in Syria. So do you think perhaps instead of blaming Obama, he could look at his own statements as what gave Assad the boldness to take this move?
Again, I don't, it amazes me how on one hand, the man brags about the followership that he has on social media and how he can circumvent the traditional media by sending out a tweet. But then when he makes a statement like that, and there might not necessarily be some causality, but certainly some correlation between him making that statement and Bashar al-Assad then having this chemical attack, then he says, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
All I did was make a statement.
Yes.
I don't control the world.
Yeah, it has just been an amazing week for me to watch as this unfolds, because it's getting kind of predictable between his lagging poll numbers and the fact that, clearly most Republicans are hawkish because, while the alt-right is clearly upset and unhappy, on the other hand, you have people like Lindsey Graham, Senator McCain, who are singing his praises, that are all of a sudden calling this man presidential. And what I'm trying to wrap my brain around is, what is it about bombing someone that makes you presidential?
To your point, I'll even take it a step further. I heard Lindsey Graham and John McCain try to compare Donald Trump to their patron saint of the Republican Party, Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
All because he was decisive and he dropped these bombs and he's sticking up for. Again, if you're going to be America first, be America first. We've got people that are hungry here. We've got people that are starving here. Not to minimize what happened to the people who got bombed or who got that chemical attack in Syria. But to your point, this is not anything new.
Right.
And the world community has to make a decision about whether or not we are going to intervene in these civil wars or not. But if we're not, then we can't just have the United States just making these unilateral decisions. I mean, again, to your point, somebody showed Trump a picture, he got emotional and then ordered an attack. We cannot afford, that's dangerous.
I'd agree.
To have someone who is in control of the world's largest military to be making emotional decisions, just shooting from the hip. There are too many people around Trump that we can't trust to have this man sitting in the White House with his finger on the button.
Well, here's the other thing too, because I hate to divert from this point, but you make an excellent point there. It wasn't even effective. So what happens in America a lot is that we do certain things that make us feel better, but they're not effective. So, for example, the death penalty.
Right.
But it really isn't effective. I'll give you another example. Drug testing welfare recipients. Again, it makes us feel better, not effective. And I would put this in that category because, first of all, he had to call Russia to tell them we were about to do it.
Right.
And I can't imagine that Russia was beginning to get all their stuff out and Assad and his troops were sitting there going, I wonder where they're going.
Right.
So exactly. The only things we were able to destroy is what Assad wanted us to destroy. Allowed to be left behind to be destroyed. And that, to your point, the same airport was up and running the very next day. So I know one thing, if somebody, and again, there's so many levels of hypocrisy that it's just hard to even wrap it around. And the other thing too is he shouldn't. Well, I won't get into whether or not he should have, but I'll say that he wasn't supposed to do it per the law, because if you look at, I did my work on this. The United Nations Charter, a treaty the United States has ratified, recognizes two justifications for using force on another country's soil without its consent, and those two justifications are one, having the permission of the Security Council, or having a valid self-defense claim. In the case of Syria, the United Nations did not approve the strike, and the Defense Department justified it, our Defense Department justified it as intended to deter the regime from using chemical weapons again. That's not self-defense.
We're still operating under an AUMF, an authorization for military force, that the Congress originally did after the attacks of 9/11. And I read that also, that the Trump administration is trying to use the original AUMF from 9/11 to justify their attack in Syria.
Right, and you can't, because that's specific to the 9/11 attack.
Exactly. This is about distraction, deflection, and money, as it always is.
Well, as usual, time is against us. We could go on and on and on because there's tons of points that we didn't get a chance to bring up, but we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to be on with Ms. Gloria Brown Marshall to discuss Neil Gorsuch. Thank you for watching and listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We are back, good people. You are listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. Again, I am Atiba Buchanan with my co-host, Mr. David Seaton. And in our last half hour here, we are bringing it for you today. We are going to discuss our new Supreme Court Justice, Mr. Gorsuch. And let me just say off top, to me, he is just not a legitimate candidate. He is not a legitimate appointee. I will never, ever forgive the Republicans for what they did to the Obama administration, for Scalia to die in February of 2016 and then not allow the active president to appoint someone. I mean, again, I can take an up or down vote. I can take if they had not voted him, I can take them voting against him, but not to bring it up for a vote at all, to completely ignore protocol and precedent and frankly the Constitution, and then not and conceivably not have any political capital loss because of it. I mean, they essentially they got away with it. I am wholly disheartened, and it has less to do with Gorsuch. I mean, I can certainly pick a few bones about some of his decisions, but it has less to do with him and his decisions and more to do with the process. And Jason Johnson, I saw on Joy Reid this morning, he said it best. He said Democrats need to be worried about winning. And he said Obama could have appointed someone to the Supreme Court, but he was more concerned about protocol, which, again, I can appreciate that. He's more concerned about protocol and due process than he was about winning. But, this is just my personal opinion. We need to because we're dealing with a party that does not care anything about precedent or protocol. And I think we need to start playing by their rules.
We saw that when they when they used the nuclear option.
Exactly.
To get Neil Gorsuch in.
Exactly.
And I mean, now that that's gone, the danger now is that the Supreme Court is going to be made up of people from extremes based on whomever is in power at that particular time. So I think we're coming into a dangerous time for the Supreme Court.
Well, David and I are certainly no experts in this field. We're just trying to voice the opinion of the common man. That's what we are here to do. But we do have an expert here with us today. Joining us right now is Miss Gloria J. Brown Marshall. Just to give you a little bit of background about this very incredible woman, she received the Ida B. Wells Barnett Justice Award for her work with civil rights and women's justice issues. She has a forthcoming book that is titled Black Women, Salem Witch Trials to Civil Rights Activists, a Legal History. She is a former civil rights attorney. Brown Marshall is an associate professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, teaching constitutional law, race and the law, and evidence. She is a member of the Gender Studies faculty of John Jay College, as well as a member of the Bar of the Supreme Court of the United States. Ms. Brown Marshall, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm not sure if you recall, but you were with us before on our prior podcast called We Hear You,
yes,
where we find the humanity in the headlines. And again, I know how accomplished and bad you are. So I just wanted our listeners to have an opportunity to appreciate just the legal mind that we have joining us today.
Well, thank you.
So what are your thoughts on Neil Gorsuch and this whole production from the Republican from the Senate?
Well, we're in trouble right here in River City. We're in big trouble, and we're talking about a 49-year-old Supreme Court designee, and the U.S. Supreme Court justices sit for life, and he was an excellent choice from the conservative standpoint because they have somebody who is easygoing in appearance and presents himself well, even though I watched the hearings, he never really answered any questions, and joked around so much that it made me uncomfortable that he is hiding a great deal. But what really concerns me, as was pointed out, was the horrific, diabolical measures by which the Republicans actually got their nominee in place in ignoring Merrick Garland and ignoring President Obama's right to appoint Supreme Court justices during his term.
Right. And when I listen to you, and that's a really good point that you bring up, when we talk about Supreme Court justices, they are on the court for life. And then now we're talking about the Supreme Court that has put this, who a lot of people regard Neil Gorsuch as pretty far right wing. The last really bastion of protection that we had was the idea of stare decisis. So that the idea for our listeners, something like Roe versus Wade wouldn't be overturned, even though if you got a Supreme Court that would necessarily vote that way, because it's been precedent for so long. But the Republicans, they've deconstructed all the rules. We don't even have the protection of stare decisis anymore, do we?
Not really, because what the conservatives, and something that Senator Al Franken asked of Neil Gorsuch, Judge Gorsuch, during the Senate hearings, and this is why would, if you're the person you claim to be, I'm paraphrasing, if you're the person you want us to, that you to appear to be, why would the conservatives put your name forward? Why would they allow you to be here? So the conservative nominees to the court, that whole list, the three last vetted judges for the high court, didn't even go through Trump. They were given to Trump. So the conservatives said, in order for you to be president, we had to get our base to vote for you when we didn't really like you, your values, not our values, and what we wanted to exchange is a Supreme Court nominee of our choice. And so there was Thomas Hardiman, who was on the Third Circuit, who represented the working man's judge, who was the first person his family go to college, who drove a cab to make his tuition money for law school. He would have been the everyman's choice if they were actually doing what a populist vote candidate would do, which is to represent the everyday man. Instead, they choose Gorsuch, who's an Oxford grad, Harvard grad, mother was the first head of the Environmental Protection Agency who left under a cloud. All to say, at the end of the day, unfortunately, we have someone who, when it comes to religion, is very conservative, and that's what the conservatives want. And if they have their argument, which they've used successfully in building the precedent, that one's free exercise of religion should trump any other individual rights, and those individual rights could go down to same-sex marriage, race discrimination. Any of these individual rights will be compared to the right to freely exercise your religion and not give people contraceptives, not respect same-sex marriage, and not respect interracial couples or any type of race-based discrimination.
And we thank you so much for providing that information. And you're leading us to exactly what I wanted to ask you and have the conversation about today. What's at stake here? And, because a lot of, when people are trying to, catch 5 minutes of the news, again, I can't blame the average person for not being able to talk about this stuff, or not know exactly what's going on, or not appreciate the severity of the potential consequences here. So if you could kind of lay out maybe some of the things that what's really at stake with the nomination of Neil Gorsuch, right? And then having obviously a conservative majority in the Supreme Court for the foreseeable future.
Well, right now it was 4-4, and 4-4 means when there's a tie on the court, 4 liberals, 4 conservatives, then the lower court's ruling stands. With this conservative voice means we'll go into 5-4 pretty much. And anyone who is looking at a social justice issue, an issue involving the rights of the individual against government, certain things like that, they're going to have an uphill battle. They had an uphill battle anyway under Justice Scalia, but when he died suddenly under suspicious circumstances that have never been explained,
right?
Without an autopsy, and the cause of death given by a doctor over the telephone, never examining his body. We're in this shroud of secrecy, this shroud of there are people who want what they want and they don't care how they get it. And I'm not trying to put in undertones of, doom, but I'm saying that they have a long-term vision, and that long-term vision is 30, 40, 50 years down the line, because by the year 2045, this nation will be majority people of color. It will be very significantly obvious that it's majority people of color, but it will be, based on the numbers, majority people of color. So what we have at stake here is a group of people who, people of color haven't seem to embrace this yet, but other folks have, and they're putting into place laws that will probably turn this country into an apartheid state, in which you have the minority white America ruling economically, socially, politically, the core of the country and what happens despite their smaller numbers in population. So in every aspect, the Gorsuch nomination is all lined up in soldier-like, very clear fashion to maintain political, economic, and social power in this country going into the next 50 years. That's what's at stake.
Exactly, and this is David, and I follow you here. I follow you there exactly. But here's my potential chronology of what will happen. Trump is going to continue to plummet in popularity. He's going to continue to split the Republican Party. We're going to get a Democratic president, whomever that might be, in 2020, get exactly 50 votes or 51 votes in the Senate, and now we don't even have to worry about the filibuster. There's no way that the Republicans can even bring it back up once Democrats get power, and we've already got 3 of the liberal justices who are all pretty old, who are 70, in their late 70s, some in their early 80s, who can then retire, and then we can replace the court with our choices. What do you think about that?
I think you're still looking at 4, 5, 10 years. You're talking to people, or you should be talking about the next 50 years. What is the image of freedom? What is the image of how we want to live by 2045 going forward?
Right.
And we could put in other Supreme Court justices and but when you're battling people looking at the long term, even though they say in sports, you got to win each game, but the idea is that you get to the playoffs and then win the playoffs.
Right.
So you can't just focus on the next game alone. You also have to focus on the playoffs down the line. What team do you want in place? How do we get our communities to understand that social, political, and economic power plays are taking place right now, laying a groundwork for generations, the next 2 generations. So Trump is a figurehead of the obvious conservative movement. So is Steve Bannon. These are considered, they're the obvious ones. And what they're going to learn to do is to be more discreet with it. They're going to learn to have more of a Gorsuch face to things than a Trump face, because the Trump face and the Steve Bannon face are too obvious. That
is a great point. And I said that many times during the election process. When people were, when a lot of people were against Trump, I said, a lot of people were against Trump not because of his racism, but because he was overt in his racism and not covert. Because the racism has always been there. It just used to be covert before, and they just weren't ready to be overt with it with Donald Trump. But let me bring this up, because I like to put this where people can feel it, and you let me know if I'm my assertion of this. I would argue that Donald Trump is president because of the Supreme Court. And what I mean by that is, when they gutted the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court did that back in 2013. That set the precedent then for all of this voter suppression. So when you look at the collective effect of all the voter suppression all across the country in the 2016 election, most of that was permitted because of the Voting Rights Act being gutted by the Supreme Court. So one could even argue that the only reason we have a President Trump is because of a decision made by the Supreme Court. And that's one reason why this is so important.
Well, then once again, if you think in decades, Chief Justice John Roberts came up with a theory of how to gut the Voting Rights Act before he even became a judge. Oh, wow. He was on the prior course. He was on the circuit court before he got to the Supreme Court. He gave conservatives that theory back when he was an attorney. That's why I'm saying, if we don't think long range, if we don't understand generationally what's going on, then we're going to be nibbling around the edges as opposed to actually going for what we want. You said before it's about the win. So if it was about the win, Hillary Clinton should have chosen Bernie. Even she should have held her nose and chose Bernie and moved forward instead of a Bernie-type person in her running mate. Yes. I said she should have chosen Wesley Clark, who was a general, because that would have balanced out those Southern conservatives who were unsure if they wanted to vote for a woman. Or she should not have run in the first place, because she had so many negatives. If you're talking about the win, yes. And that's why they say politics makes strange bedfellows, because you're making sausage here. You're not baking a cake. Baking a cake is nice with Julia Child. Your sausage, you have people with bloody aprons walking around, and they're gruff and they're rough and they're doing a lot of stuff in the back room you don't want to know about. politics is making sausage, and we're relatively new to politics because each time we get involved, there's a backlash forcing us out of it, like voter suppression.
Right.
So we've been in politics since the 1800s, but as far as the nitty gritty, making the laws that make our lives better, we have not gotten to that point in politics, and President Obama did not help at all because he did not help us advance the Black agenda at all. He did a lot of other great things, but that wasn't it.
Gloria J. Brown Marshall, we thank you for being on today. I know we could continue to have this conversation for at least another hour, and we're definitely going to have you back because I'm sure that Neil Gorsuch and this new Supreme Court is going to do something we need to discuss.
And we can add Democratic strategists to her resume.
Tell our listeners.
You know what? I like the idea of the Democratic strategist, but I also want to just make this one quick point.
Sure.
We could have been having the same argument around a Black female Supreme Court nominee. My argument was at the time and still remains, if you're not going to get what you want, then if you wanted to make it symbolic, then a Black woman should have been that nominee. You could have not had her in office and moved the ball a little bit forward. As I said again, where is the African American political agenda or agenda at all? And that's the discussion I would like to have again in the future.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you on that point. I get exactly what you're saying with that.
Tell our listeners how they can find you and how they can follow you.
Well, my most recent book is The Voting Rights War, and The Voting Rights War is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all those places. And, of course, my publisher is Rowman & Littlefield. It's available on their website, The Voting Rights War. And I've been on the speaking tour, so I'm available for speaking engagements at colleges. I was at Hampton University. I've been at Hofstra and Kane University, so I'm looking forward to speaking to young people, too, about these voting rights issues.
Thank you so much for being on with us today. And if you could remain a continued friend of the show, we would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. That's great.
Take care.
She made a deep point, though. And again, a lot of African Americans aren't really ready to hear that Barack Obama as the first, and again, I like to be very specific. People refer to him as the first Black president. He was biracial.
Right.
So, but having said that, for him to be the, in air quotes, first Black president, no, we did not have the African American agenda addressed under Barack Obama, and it's definitely not going to get addressed under Trump and this Republican Party. I mean, it's amazing to me to see every other constituency, whether it's LGBT, you see every other constituency using the law to their benefit, but those laws were written off of our blood, sweat, and tears.
Absolutely.
That's infuriating to me sometimes.
Again, time is against us. We want to thank Breon Jones, our producer, for putting together another phenomenal show. We want to thank Mr. Earl Winfrey and IntellectualRadio.com for giving us a platform. Most of all, we want to thank you, the listener and viewer, for being with us today. We'll be back next week with hopefully another phenomenal show. Thanks so much. Catch you next week.